Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally lay down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Voice of perception.
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
No wonder my show sounds like this.
No, your show sounds great. Well, back here with Renegade historian Thaddeus Russell. Thank you, sir, so much for gracing me with your presence here today. And welcome back to the show.
I don't know about gracing. That's like an aristocratic term.
Ah,
I think
damn.
only kings and queens and lords and dukes grace anyone. I don't grace shit, Mike. Come on.
Yeah, you're gonna get me for all my terminology. I know it. It's I'm
just hanging out.
I'm entering the danger zone here. Well, well. Thanks, man. Thanks for showing up and hanging out.
Anytime.
Totes appreciate.
That's better.
So look, I mean, I love the fact that your podcast is taking off and doing well. Unregistered with Thaddeus Russell, it's an absolutely incredible show. Fantastic intro. You were talking before about how you're getting people to come on your show and say things that they normally wouldn't say, and I absolutely love that. And that's a talent that is very rare for a lot of people. Almost like a kind of like a psychiatrist or something, kind of digging things out of people, right?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I was kind of in the middle of answering that.
Until I ruined everything. We'll keep it real with the people. I ruined it.
Once again, you fucked it up, Mike. It's a great question. No one's asked me that question, and I love it. So you're actually doing really, really well here. So that skill, if it's a skill, I don't know if it's a skill. I don't know if it's a skill or if it's just a manner or a particular curiosity I have. Like, I'm always interested in the inner workings of people, which, by the way, can be either seen or experienced as sort of the empathetic, kind shrink who wants to help you, or it can be experienced as the intervening busybody know-it-all who wants to psychoanalyze you in order to manipulate you or dismiss you or something. So it can cut either way. I mean, in other words, people don't always appreciate it.
Right.
I think on the show, though, so far, at least as far as I can tell, most of the guests, maybe all the guests, but most of them, and certainly a lot of the audience, I think, has liked it. I don't think I've got any negative comments about that. The only negative comments I get about the show are about me talking too much. That I just talk too much. It's funny because I'm quite sure that I allow my guests to say everything they want to say. The show's long, it's long form. And so that criticism doesn't really make sense to me, except I think that it's basically, they see like a violation of decorum, So they have this idea that a host of a show is supposed to just ask questions and then shut up.
Right.
And that's what respectful people do, and I sort of violate that norm. I can't think of any other reason why it would be a problem, because listen to the show. I mean, the guests get to say everything and more. I certainly talk a lot.
It's your show. It's your show.
Well,
it's like you should talk.
If I didn't let them talk or fully express themselves, then I wouldn't like that either. That's not okay. But
you're not being Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, no. I mean, I am very comfortable. I'm very sure that I do let people say everything they want to say.
I listened to that show with you and Camille, And I was like, this is what I want to hear. This is what people want to hear, because it was like, I think maybe 2, almost 3 hours long or something like that. But it was a conversation back and forth, a challenging, interesting, engaging conversation. You let him talk, you let you talk. There's a back and forth, and that's great. I mean, that's the kind of podcast that I especially like. You know, I
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I mean, so not in terms of content, but in terms of format, my models were Mark Maron and Joe Rogan.
Yep.
Obviously, the content's really, really different,
right,
in both cases, and I have major beefs with Mark Maron on all sorts of things. And Joe and I are clearly different too. But Maron actually was the original model. I was a big fan of his show before he had Obama on, and I said something about how George Carlin wouldn't probably appreciate that, and he blocked me on Twitter.
Oh.
And ever since then, I've not been a fan of Maron, but I listened to him religiously. That was kind of like the first podcast I was really into, and I would sort of study it and think about what he was doing. And the thing that he was doing that was really original and that made that show so popular was that he would not just talk to celebrities and comedians about their careers, but about their lives and their personal lives. And he would dig very deeply and ask questions that are not normally asked, personal questions. And then he would weave that kind of into the narrative of their careers. And so that I thought, while I was listening to that, God, this would be great. It would be great if there was a show like that, but with people who are political, with political ideas.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting.
So
and
yeah.
No, I was just going to say that's interesting because the difference between people's careers and the difference between their lives, it's like, okay, well, which subject matter are you going to choose as a form of communication to identify somebody with? And it's almost as if, like, you know, the difference between these people that we consider, you know, referring back to your book, the Renegades, it's like, let's talk more about the lives of these people rather than kind of what we've seen. I'm just drawing a comparison between identifying people by their careers and then digging deeper between their lives. That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's so, in kind of cultural studies terminology, this is a fundamental part of bourgeois culture, which is something that I don't actually talk about, even though I talk about bourgeois culture all the time. You know, that's really what my work is, in large part, is a critique of bourgeois culture,
right.
Sort of the norms that became dominant in the 19th century and still are basically dominant, especially in what I call formal culture, the culture of the schools and the governments and the businessmen.
Polite society.
Yes, I mean, I've talked, of course, ad nauseum about the Puritan work ethic and the anti-sex ethic and the nuclear family ethic, and those are all very important. But another important part of bourgeois culture was that this separation of public from private. And so feminist scholars who get trashed now, or I'd say that what goes on now is the throwing out of the baby with the bathwater when people talk about feminism now. I mean, critics of feminism, and they're current critics of current feminism are largely correct. I agree with them on most stuff. I think current feminism is pretty rancid.
Yeah.
But the history of feminism, you know, has given so many things that I think are invaluable and that I use all the time. And this is one of them. So feminist historians are the ones who identified this split in European and American cultures between the public and the private. So they've called it, beginning in the 1970s, they identified one as the public sphere and the other as the private sphere. And since they were making a feminist gender critique, they noticed that women were relegated to, or at least inhabited, the private sphere, and men were supposed to be in control of the public sphere. And that seems indisputable, certainly historically. Of course, that's breaking down now. But, you know, 19th and early 20th centuries, there's no question about that. So it's a really important thing. The thing that the feminists didn't talk about, that I do talk about, is that the public sphere has always been hyper puritanical. So you're not allowed, if you're operating in the public sphere, you're not allowed on any level to do the things that my podcast does.
Yeah.
You're not allowed. you're not allowed to talk about your sex life. You're not allowed to talk about hating people in, dirty ways. You're not allowed to talk about, painful moments in your childhood. You're not allowed to talk about your episodes with violence. Man, I interviewed P.D. Diabru, who's a comic in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just coming up now. I think he has a good chance of becoming a big thing pretty soon. But right now he's doing small clubs, but he's getting a bigger and bigger audience. But
yeah, I think I know him. His name sounds very familiar. Yeah.
He knows Dave Smith.
Yeah.
But his story, we didn't even talk about his comedy. He really talked for 2 hours, and I just let him talk. This was one of those episodes where this was the only episode, in fact, where I really didn't talk much at all, because his story is unbelievable. He was born and raised in the Bronx, Black, Guyanese, Caribbean. He's born here, but his parents were West Indians. Growing up in the 90s in that neighborhood, man, I mean, it's like the violence, the crime, the sex, he was in jail when he was 15 years old, in an adult jail. He became a major criminal kingpin for a few years, was living like the life of Scarface in Miami, and then it all came crashing down, and he was living in his car, and he was arrested several times. I mean, it's just,
yeah.
It's like no one in my life can relate to this at all. It was one of the amazing things about that interview. I was thinking, man, I mean, he lives. We did the interview on the Lower East Side.
Oh, cool.
And I was just thinking, and I used to live in Manhattan, and I used to live in Morningside Heights, like just a few miles from the North Bronx. I just thought these are absolutely two different worlds. But my point being here is that PD was talking about stuff that you're not supposed to talk about in public. Certainly you can talk about it in public now, but you can't talk about it as a public figure, right? So a government official or a businessman or a school teacher, a school teacher would lose their job immediately if they talked about any of this stuff.
Right.
I mean, PD's first sexual experience was with when he was 13 or 14, with 6 guys running a train on a 14-year-old girl. And it's funny, when he said it, he said my first sexual experience was with a girl on a train. And I said, oh, on the subway? Anyway.
My God.
We were running a train. I said, oh, was this consensual? And he said, oh, yeah. Now, I don't know. But regardless, my point is here that it's just, imagine having a career as a public figure and saying that. So the reason this is the case, I believe, and I guess some other people have argued this too, is that it's actually because of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Democracy requires that the people be disciplined because the people will run the country, and
right.
To run a country, you have to be, self-regulating.
Yeah, I heard that. Are you familiar with Slavoj? What's his name? Slavoj Zizek.
Zizek, yeah.
Yeah. I was hearing him talk about something like that, where he says he doesn't favor democracy because he says I don't want to be involved. He has this crazy like Slovenian accent. I don't want to be involved in the process. I want to play video games. I want to watch TV. I want to enjoy arts. Yeah, he was saying about how he says
he stole that from me.
Maybe he did. You should hit him up, get him on your show.
That's interesting. I've never, because he's a lefty. I've never heard of any lefty say anything like that. He must have stolen it from me. Not stolen it. Maybe
he considers. I think he considers himself to be a Marxist. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I will check that out. But yeah, I think that's why. So our government officials are the people. I mean, they actually are, because we do really vote for them. And they're not aristocrats, and they're not kings. There's no hereditary monarchy here. And, yes, I know all of the limitations of our democracy, but it is essentially a democracy. I mean, these people come from us, and so they have to, if they exhibit, like Trump, and this is exactly why Trump freaks people out so much, is that if they exhibit these things that Trump exhibits, the whole thing's going to fall apart, right? Because if the people are interested in grabbing women by the pussy and covering their houses in gold and fucking models,
Yeah.
right? and bragging about themselves, then the whole country is going to fall apart. Now, that's the logic is correct, you know. If in fact the entire country and all of our leaders were like Donald Trump, then I would actually be much more worried about this phenomenon, because it's only Trump, and then everybody else in Washington, D.C. is pretty damn puritanical, certainly as public figures.
Right.
I'm not worried about it. But anyway, that's the argument that I make about it.
Sexless, kind of androgynous, like just. Well, you know what I find very interesting? Well, I found very interesting was when you mentioned the grab him by the pussy comment, and I just remember that, you know, I don't know if it was Jake Tapper. I think it was Jake Tapper on CNN. You know, I am absolutely appalled. You know, I've been in locker rooms before, and I have never heard this kind of talk. And it, you know, it's like, you know, for me, and I was doing part of the problem at the time, Dave, and you know, we're like, look, man, like. There's a lot of people that just see through this absolute bullshit that's being pumped through your stupid puppet mouth on CNN. I just don't understand how anybody believes the public face. Or do you think it's the fact that we want to believe that people are that way, so we kind of psychologically accept the lie because we want to pretend that life is this nice thing that we can box up and put into little folders and feel pleasant about?
Yeah, so I don't totally agree with you on this. And I've talked about this, I forget, somewhere else, but the Tapper, I don't think he's entirely wrong about that. I am a middle class kid, basically. I mean, I spent a good chunk of my childhood in a pretty working class, mostly black neighborhood. But you know, my parents were definitely of the middle class and had middle class values, essentially. I mean, you know, they were middle class bohemians, but you know, they came from East Coast, Midwestern, white middle class backgrounds, and so that was essentially my world. And then, you know, certainly after my childhood, ever since I was 18 or 19 years old, I've been in a totally middle class world. In college and in Columbia and New York City and then Los Angeles and, you know, Oregon now, it's all been totally middle class. And that's been my experience too. I would say, well, let me say this. If someone were to clip this and put it on the internet, it looks like I'm racist in a way. But among white middle class, it doesn't matter about race, among middle class Americans, I think Tapper's right. I never heard much or any of that kind of talk among people around me who were middle class, and that goes for black middle class people and Asian middle class people, working class people, you know, and that goes for all races too. But it tends to be disproportionately brown and black people. That kind of language that Trump used on that bus, you trying to tell me that's not normal? Ask P.D. Diabru.
Right.
I mean, you know, listen to him. Listen when he's on my show. You listen to him talk about stuff like sex and gender and women, and it's an entirely different language. And it's really basically the language that Trump uses. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, no one will acknowledge this, but Trump was very, very popular among African Americans before he ran for president.
Mm.
They identified with him in a lot of ways, and so now.
And do you think that's because of his kind of ostentatious behavior, like his you know, he's kind of flamboyant and with the gold and the opulence? You think it's because of something like that?
Oh yeah, Trump is black.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, he's black and gay. Seriously. I mean,
no, well, really, that explains the twinks for Trump.
Yeah, no, yeah, he's queer and black. I mean, really, if you look at sort of how blacks and gays have both been represented in the popular culture and how, in large part, they've represented themselves in popular culture, I mean, there's no question that Trump is very much of that lineage. So ostentation, putting gold on everything, talking about sex, having the hot chick as your wife at your side, bragging all the time about how great you are, you know, talking about how you're going to do great harm to your enemies. Who is that? That's every rapper on the radio.
Right.
I mean, that's total totally black working class culture, no doubt about it.
Wow.
And then the same with, and then for gays, it's the very similar stuff. I mean, if you go to a drag show, go to a drag show tonight, or watch, if you can't go to a drag show, just watch RuPaul's Drag Race. And what do you see? You see tremendous ostentation, self-aggrandizement, bragging about oneself, putting other people down, self-interest, and not taking offense at, and being sort of amoral in a to me a great way. To me, this is all good stuff, by the way. Not taking offense at particular words or slights or put downs of groups, just not being interested in imposing morality on others, or policing others morally, and that's Trump. He's absolutely a black drag queen.
That's so funny that you said that. So we have do we have the first black president actually right now?
That's I've been saying this for a while now.
You have been? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's funny. Yeah.
Sure.
Wow.
No doubt about it. Yeah. He's also similar to a lot of people, to the people in my book, to the Renegades.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he has a lot in common with them. Now, here's the big difference. He ran for president.
Right.
And became the head of state, with all the power that comes with. And he has already killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he's a mass murderer. Before he was president, he was pretty damn renegade. And even when he was running for president, he was pretty damn renegade, because remember, I'd say the sort of core idea in the Trump campaign was, why should I care? Why should we care about how other people live in the rest of the world? That's their business. That's their problem. Why should we go fight and die in those countries to make them like Americans? What's in it for us? Self-interest is what he was talking about. And no president, no politician at any level that I've ever heard of has ever said that in American history. I mean, ever. Any American politician in American history has said that.
Well, Ron Paul has said that.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, that particular part of it. Okay, this is true about foreign policy, but with Trump, it goes deeper than Ron Paul, because Ron Paul, I'd say there's a moralism about him, though. He does believe firmly that these things are not just sort of good for us in practical terms, meaning we don't kill and die and lose a lot of money. Mm-hmm. He also thinks it's morally wrong to go over there and do those things.
Yeah, as do I, yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't. I actually am more on...
Wait, really?
Yeah, I don't make I try not to make moral claims. I think
is that because you're a moral relativist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's cause and effect. You're switching them around there. I mean, I think that moral claims do nothing but damage, do nothing but bad things. From my point of view, according to my values,
right.
They're anti-intellectual. They are imperialist. They often lead to countries invading other countries and colonizing them. It's there's nothing good about it, and so I try really hard to keep the morality out of my own thinking. It's hard, and I have to work at it all the time. But I think it's actually what I've been thinking about a lot lately with Charlottesville and what's been going on. And two things kind of have come together on this for me recently. I've been paying attention a lot to these new atheist guys, Sam Harris, mm-hmm. Dawkins, Sam Harris mostly, but and then so Harris's whole thing is religion is wrong because it cannot be scientifically proven to be correct. None of religion's claims can be scientifically proven to be true, right? The scientific method shows that religion is false. All the claims of religion are false, that God does not exist. Okay, that's fine. I'm with that. And then he turns right around and says, the problem with Islam, the problem with Trump, he's a huge anti-Trump person, the problem with SJWs on campus is that they are immoral. And he really leaves it at that. He'll say they're unethical, or sometimes he'll say they are deranged or mentally ill. It's either he either psychologizes them or mostly moralizes. And so that, Sam, is not an argument.
Huh.
When you say, right, when you say something is unethical, that's actually, guess what that is? That's just faith. That's an article of faith. There's no way to prove that there's a morality that's good. I mean, how can you possibly prove that? How would the scientific method prove that murder is good or bad, or that incest is good or bad? You can't prove it. You can just stake your claim on it. That's fine. But the scientific method does not apply. There's no such thing as objective morality. In fact, I think that's the most ridiculous concept.
Right.
But that's what he's saying. So it's this very weird thing he does, which is he completely contradicts himself and basically engages in religious thinking, Mr. New Atheist.
Yeah, they do. And, I think there's a lot of a dogma to that kind of...
yeah. Does that make sense, though? Like, so he'll say things, just listen to him for 5 minutes, I swear. I promise you, he'll say something is unethical or immoral about 10 times. And it's completely unselfconscious about it, and he acts as if that's an argument. Mm-hmm. Trump is just immoral. He's just despicable and immoral. It's like, well, yeah, okay, great. So how can you prove that? Now, the other thing about this is that Sam Harris is operating totally unconsciously within a very particular culture, which has its own morality.
Right.
He's operating within, the United States of America, 21st century, upper middle class, bi-coastal Los Angeles, liberal culture. That's very much who he is. Mm-hmm. And it has its own very firm morality. And so he just assumes that's correct. All those norms, all those ideas, all those beliefs, it's just right. And so he doesn't need to make an argument. He just knows he's right. And so, when it comes to Islam, he'll say things like, well, those people over there, they are absolutely unethical in the Middle East, and there's no reasoning with them. They're just unethical.
Right.
So
yeah. That's the old kind of the old chestnut of we got to go and discipline these savages because they're all backwards and we got to show them how to be, right?
Well, yeah, except that no, it's not. This is different. You have to annihilate them.
Oh, okay. Totally wipe them out because they don't deserve to exist because they're unethical and immoral.
He wouldn't say that, I don't think. He would say that you can't change them. So there's nothing we can do but kill them because otherwise they will kill us.
Okay.
That is precisely his argument. I'm sure he wouldn't disagree with me on that. That's his argument. That's the logic of it, right? So if you are an immoral person, and by the way, all this kind of thinking is completely derived from Christianity. If you are an immoral person, who does that associate you with?
Oh, are you asking me a question?
Yeah, the devil.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So you're satanical.
So you can see this in all the discussion about Trump, right? There's nothing he can say or do to redeem himself at all. If you say one positive, not even positive thing, if you refuse, and this is what happens to me, if you refuse to denounce him as a white supremacist Nazi, you are actually consorting with the devil. Mm. This is, I get this all the time.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I got this during the election when I would smash Hillary Clinton about things. People would automatically assume that I must be in favor of Donald Trump.
Yeah, because morality is black and white. It's good and evil. There's nothing in between. That's one of its problems. It's a binary system always.
Right. Yeah. I really do get that because I think you are a man of nuance and gray. And I think that's why I like you so much because it's it's difficult to be that person. It's difficult to juggle and live in the mystery and live in the wonder and kind of move forward and always continuously ask questions. And I think that a lot of people just want to shut their brains off. They just want straight answers. But like that morality, that thing, that black and white, that can't be the case, because, like, for example, with abortion, I think that there's a lot of this is such a big thing for people, and it's like, well, if you're pro-life, then you're evil. If you're not, you're evil too. So it's like, well, why can't there be a middle ground? I was just recently reading this book called Society Against the State, and it was talking about, the indigenous kinds of cultures of the past, the hunter-gatherer types of tribes and societies, where they would have someone like a chief, and the chief was basically a person that they would appeal to for tough decisions and wisdom. And I think that aspect of our culture has been lost to some degree. That there's no gray area. There's no like, okay, well, yeah, we can murder an unborn child, but it's still murdering an unborn child, but we're still going to do it anyway because that's what we're going to do. Is that moral?
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that bad? Is that wrong?
Yeah. I think, yes, it's lazy. That's the other problem with it. It's just a shortcut. You don't have to read anything. You don't have to study anything. You don't have to know anything.
Yeah.
You're just informed that so-and-so is bad or evil, and then you just and you just continue to denounce them. I mean, this is also my life. I've written about slavery in ways that are unexpected and new and highly unusual and cut against the dominant narrative of American slavery. And it's, if you read it for 2 seconds, you'll see that I am not only completely anti-slavery, and not only not just anti-racist, I am, if anything, pro-black and anti-white. It doesn't matter, because if you veer from the good narrative, which is the dominant narrative, you just have, the whole thing's bad. The whole apple is rotten, and
right.
So you can't say anything. I mean, either you have to give me 5 hours in which I deliver a lecture to you with all of the citations, all of the examples, all of the evidence, and frame it in exactly the right way so that I'm a good guy. I can't really say anything about my work on slavery in public without being told that I'm a racist, or at least being implied that I'm a racist.
Sure,
Because
of course, yeah.
If you veer from the good in any way, you're with the devil. And that's the way Americans think. So Charlottesville, this is what's going on now. And it's really, in this case, it's just especially ridiculous because whatever the people, whoever they were who were protesting the taking down of the Robert E. Lee statue, well, I happen to know that many of them are white separatists, like Richard Spencer and those guys. That's what he's about. People don't know this. They don't know this. They think he wants to kill black people. He doesn't. He wants to get out. He wants to leave America. He wants to take all the white racists with him and go have their own white nation state.
Yeah, he's a national socialist.
Yeah, no, but he's not interested in resegregating the United States. He's not interested in imposing slavery. He's not interested in doing anything to black people. He just wants to leave.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's like, when I heard him say that, I was thinking, why aren't we just like giving this guy money and, giving him Wyoming or whatever he wants and saying, please take all your friends and go live there. We'll leave you alone. Why is he considered a threat when he wants to leave? This is what people say, though. They conflate him with every worst person ever in history, and they're all the same. They're Hitler, they're the Ku Klux Klan who lynched black people, but that's actually not true. So, and the nuance, it's not just nuance in this case, it's actually important. So if Richard Spencer were actually thinking about or planning attacks on people, physical attacks, then fuck yeah, I'd be down there too, marching and beating the shit out of him in the streets. I'm
sure.
all about it.
Me too, and I'd be right there as well. Yeah.
But it's actually just not even true and all you got to do is just spend 5 minutes researching the guy, and you'll find this out. And then the rest of the people there, there were probably 5 or 10 actual Nazis. Now, are they really really are they really Nazis? You know what I mean? Like, Nazis were actually planning to take control of the state, and they actually did that. They formed the party. They always had long-term goals and plans for precisely what they would do with the state once they had that power. Really, are these guys down there planning to seize control of the American state? First of all, if this was their plan, good luck. They're about at least 5 centuries away from being even remotely close to that as a possibility. And secondly, I don't think so. I think they're basically LARPers, right? What's that called? Live action role playing. The guys who dress up.
Yeah.
These guys down there are LARPers. These neo-Confederates, neo-Nazis down there, that's all they're doing. They're dressing it. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing political. I'm not saying they're not racist. I mean, obviously they're fucking racist because they, said things that are by anybody's standard racist. Sure, no doubt about it. They're making racist statements for sure. They're making a point that is in some part, at least in large part, racist. But these are the most powerless people on earth. They really are.
Yeah, they really are. They're an extremely small minority.
And even if they had some power, it's not at all clear to me that they would do anything with that power that would be harmful to anyone. Maybe, but I don't see that. But mostly, they're completely powerless. And then the people who are the actual the neo-Nazis also, there's like 10 of them in this country. I mean, that is almost non-existent. The Ku Klux Klan basically doesn't exist. The Spencerite, that's a real thing. I don't think it's big at all, and they certainly have no power either. But, it looks like it's in the thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people who would call themselves Richard Spencer followers.
Yeah.
That's a thing, but look at what they actually want. They want to leave. It's like, oh, the white racists want to leave the United States. Well, why shouldn't we celebrate and help them? Instead, they're the devil, and they have to be destroyed, annihilated.
Yeah.
They have to be annihilated. There's no discussion. So it's a kind of thinking that I think if you're going to do politics, this is the problem I have with American political culture. It's that it's all a morality play. It's always a morality play. Charlottesville is a great example. It's always a morality play in which there are about just a handful of actors, right? Because very few Americans do this stuff or care about this stuff. There's like a handful of people on this very small stage, but it's in front of this massive audience of hundreds of millions of people who are all watching this closely. And that's it. It's like there's good and evil on stage, and then we all watch it and cheer on one side or the other and want to kill the other side. We need the end of the play to be the death of the villain. And that's it. It's so simple-minded, and it does so much damage to understanding, to nuance, to human beings, to the sovereignty of other countries, to the autonomy of individuals, to the idea of self-determination and agency. It's just it's a bad way to go, and it's almost all Americans, even very, very smart, educated Americans, indulge in it.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, it's like people just, they don't want to read, they don't want to know anything, they don't want to take the time to understand. And do you think? And I know that you got Renegade University out there, and you're you've been active and vocal about the education system here in America. I mean, do you think this is a deliberate kind of, as John Taylor Gatto would say, like a dumbing down, an intentional kind of dumbing down of people with the public school system, so they just are not informed, or they don't care about this kind of stuff?
I mean, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think public schools have intentionally dumbed down the students, the children in America. I think they have dumbed down American school children and the culture generally, but it's that the schools were always intended to serve a particular function, which was to produce good citizens and good workers, not good intellectuals.
Gotcha.
Not intelligent political actors.
Obedient workers, not thinkers.
Now, this is, I mean, if you're listening and don't believe me, just go. After about 10 minutes of Googling, you will see that the evidence is just overwhelming that this was the case. I mean, you have the founders of the public education system in this country saying over and over again for about 100 years, we need to create good factory workers. We need to create people who are willing to be soldiers. We need people who will obey the law. We need people who will not question authority, but will obey authority. And the good ones, we should train them to be authority. I mean, they were straight up about this. After World War II, they stopped talking about that. They stopped saying that stuff, but for a good 100 years, the founders of American public education were saying this over and over again. So that does not create good intellectuals. The other cause of this moralism, I think, is that it's a deeper thing in American culture generally, and a lot of historians have written about this, which is that America has always been more moralistic than other countries in its culture. So,
hey, are you like rubbing a paper or something? It's getting
sorry.
Yeah.
I was, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Coming through.
Yeah. So America's been a very Christian country. It's arguably the most Christian country. So there's, until very recently, it had one of the highest rates of church attendance, church membership in all of the Western world, and more importantly, you just see sort of this Christian kind of thinking infused in everything, including all forms of politics,
right,
including left-wing politics. And this is again a thing that sort of marks off the American left from other left-wing groups and movements in other countries. The American left in this country has always been basically Christian, either explicitly or just in the way they talk about issues and the way that they think about politics and act on politics. So there's always a martyr figure. There's always a Jesus. Someone's got to get up and die. And so we got that this last weekend. Martin Luther King, Jesus Christ figure. Cesar Chavez, he used to starve himself deliberately, did hunger strikes. You have all these, during the big labor uprisings of the 1930s, communist uprisings, you would have like the one or two organizers or activists who would get shot by the cops or the Pinkertons, and they would become the symbol of the movement, the dead one, the martyr, Jesus figure. And then you had good and evil. You had the workers were good and the capitalists were evil, or the black people were good and the whites in the South were evil. And you celebrate, you valorize austerity, simple living, the denial of pleasure in the body. Puritanism, asceticism has always been central in left-wing politics and right-wing politics too, but I think even more so in left-wing politics.
Oh, interesting.
It's a completely Christian movement from top to bottom. It's Christianity without the God. Although I would say
it's godless. That's dangerous if it's godless, right?
What they did was they replaced God with the state or the community. So
okay.
I
thought for a second you were going to say science.
That's the subset, but that's not really what's going on here. It's the Bible says sacrifice yourself for God, sacrifice your body, literally. That's what they say. Meaning, give up worldly pleasures,
right?
Give up the desires of the flesh for God, for God's community. And so the American left, socialists, liberals, communists, anarchists, all of them for hundreds of years have said, do the same thing, but do it to build a good community, usually through the state. But sacrifice your individual desires and freedom for a socialist utopia, for the state, for a new world. And it's all completely Christian.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because most people I think would associate Christian conservatives on the right to be that way as well. So there seems to be some similarities there, where it's actually interesting because like my parents are, for example, are Democrats on the left. However, they exhibit very conservative behaviors. They're avid churchgoers. I would say that they would be conservative Democrats, which is not something that you really hear about anymore much.
Right. I'd say even most like hipsters in Brooklyn are essentially this way too. I mean, sure, they care about their artisanal coffee, which is a form of bodily pleasure, but they also think that excess is terrible. They think that simplicity is good, generally speaking. They want the simplicity to be nice, but they don't want what Trump does, which is have more than you need. It's indulgence. It's excess. It shows that you care more about yourself than the world around you and the broader community. It's a selfishness. It exhibits selfishness. So the hipsters always, all of their, you know this, all their coffee bars and their craft brew houses and awesome little restaurants in Williamsburg almost always show you in some way or another that they really care, that this little business enterprise really is going to serve the community in some way or another. It's going to be green. They're going to recycle their products. They're locally sourced. You know.
Yeah, but they all have, but they all have Apple iPhones, and they all wear, you know, Nike or Adidas boosts and Nike shoes, and they all are obsessed with popular culture.
Yeah, you know why? Because Christianity fucking sucks, man. It's hard to live that way. Asceticism is hard.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. Very few people have been able to pull it off for their entire lives, and those people are monks.
Right.
And even a lot of monks end up walking down the hill and going into the village and getting a beer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, I do talk about spirituality, you know, on this show and, you know, obviously psychedelics and what that can do for you. And I think there's often a lot of thinking, I think, within that community that if you just kind of, you know, you're a spiritual being and, you know, that you don't care about material things and, you know, that kind of degree. But what value does somebody have that kind of detaches themselves from society? I mean, that they're not really contributing to society to add anything to you know, to life for themselves, not for the broader good of society, but to themselves. Why leave and be an ascetic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I know the logic doesn't work entirely. I mean, again, it's a spiritual idea, right? So that means that it doesn't apply to the real world. I mean, you know, it doesn't make any sense in the real world being a monk or in engaging in fair trade practices with your coffee suppliers in Guatemala. It actually doesn't make any difference at all in the real world, but it makes you feel better, right?
Yeah.
It makes you think that you're doing God's work in both cases. Whether you're living in a monastery or engaging in all these stupid practices that you know, at Whole Foods you see, or all these cool yuppie places,
right?
All these things that they're doing, they don't actually mean much, if anything. But that doesn't matter. What matters is it makes us feel like we're doing God's work. Mm. And in a sense we are, because yes, it is probably more work in some way. There is some sacrifice in recycling all your plates, or locally sourcing all of your ingredients, or paying your workers more than the minimum wage, which some people do voluntarily. And I'm not saying that's, you know, bad to do. I'm just saying, generally speaking, it has very little or no effect on the real world, but it just makes you feel better.
Definitely. I agree with that, because I think I have fallen into that trap myself. And I think it's along the path of kind of what I would call, and I'm air quoting, discovering truth is, you know, I think oftentimes most people are looking for some kind of ultimate truth or some kind of massive revolutionary idea that we can, you know, this is the thing and we're going to get behind this cause. But oftentimes I think what happens is they get sort of kind of co-opted and commercialized into these ideas that get packaged up and sold back to us. And then it just kind of makes us feel good, right? Like it makes us feel like, ooh, we're doing good, but we're not really doing good. But we think we are.
You know, you bringing up psychedelics is interesting. I've never talked about this either, but I've thought about this too in this way.
Oh, yes. I'm going to get you to talk about something you haven't talked about. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm pulling a Thad.
Although you might not like this, though.
It's cool. We can talk.
Yeah. I'm not opposed to psychedelics at all. You know, it's the reason I'm not turned on by it. And when I say it, I mean the culture of psychedelic drugs, not just doing the drugs. But,
sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and that's kind of what you're talking about here, right? There's a culture that comes with this stuff. Yeah, there's a particular type of person, or at least there's a culture that's associated with psychedelics, and a very different culture associated with speed, coke, meth, and yet again another very different culture associated with drinking, and another one associated with weed, right? Each drug or set of drugs has its own culture. Okay, so the reason I'm less attracted to psychedelics is that the culture tends to be this. It tends to be sort of intellectual in this way, that it values the mind over the body, meaning that what I hear people saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not that familiar with it, but I've been around plenty of people in it. They tend to say that, wow, what happens here is that you learn new things about yourself and the world, and you learn, it's kind of what you're just saying now. You learn to be a more spiritual person. Spiritual means detached from the body. That's what that means. The spirit is outside of the body. Whether it's your spirit or it's God, it's outside the body. It's asceticism completely. And it's, now, I'm not opposed to that if that's true, and I do that too, of course. This is what I do. I study myself, I study the world, I'm all about it, sure. But what they never talk about, or rarely talk about, I don't think I've ever heard any of them talk about this, is it being, I should say, they downplay this, how fun it is to do psilocybin or LSD or these new crazy psychedelics.
DMT, yeah.
Yeah, that I'm only vaguely aware of because of certain podcasts I go on.
Whew, you got to try some.
Yeah, but the way those things are talked about in particular, they don't talk about them being fun. In fact, what's the one that makes you just sick and it
ayahuasca?
Yeah, ayahuasca, right? Everybody's trying to get me to do ayahuasca, and all they have to say is, yeah, it's really, really hard, man. And it's like, you're gonna really struggle with it. It's like,
that's only one version of the thing.
But you're gonna learn so much. You're gonna change so much. So when I did psilocybin, the first hour was awesome.
Don't be so bourgeois about it. It's magic mushrooms.
Yeah, right. I was being scientific there. It was awesome because it was just fun. We just laughed constantly. We just laughed.
Yeah,
it was just pure childlike fun.
Yes,
for an hour, and then the great implosion happened. So something happened inside of me. I think I took too much. It was the first time. And just my brain just started to look inside. It felt like my brain was sort of looking inside, or trying to look inside of itself. And it was that kind of ultra introspectiveness that made me miserable for 7 hours. But I can imagine if it didn't make me miserable, I could see it, I could see coming away from that in my little 19-year-old self thinking, wow, man, that was really enlightening. But it wasn't fun. It didn't feel good. It felt terrible.
Oh, why? How come that felt terrible?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just my psychological makeup. I'm sure it just didn't, for whatever reason, my psychological makeup interacts with psilocybin in a way that makes me feel bad.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying that generally, am I wrong about this? That people of the psychedelic culture talk about the drugs in that way, that their benefits tend to be more intellectual and spiritual than physical and sensual.
Yeah, for sure, and I hate that. I'm the opposite.
Okay.
I really kind of reject this culture of this new psychedelic culture, which is being pushed out by these scientific organizations that are studying it and seeking federal approval. And I think there's something to it. There's something to it because it's kind of like a foot in, it's like putting our best foot forward to kind of comply and go with the rules. But I am very much of the school of Terence McKenna, if you're familiar with him, or Timothy Leary of these things should be, when I take psychedelics, I feel very much in my body. I feel very much like an animal. I feel very primal. I get to this, and this is actually a good segue because I wanted to talk a little bit about this, I guess, objective truth or, objectivism. And it's like there is this kind of truth that I find inside of myself by having this direct experience and being more inside of my own being that is fun. And like you said, it's fun and it's kind of like a fuck you, and it's disobedient, and that's what I think it should all be about. And so, and then I gather sort of kind of truths from the experience that I had that help inform me in my life, that help me live a better life, a happier life. And I think that there are a lot of people that can get lost in that, can get trapped in that, but But yeah, and there is this feeling that you get that gives you, and I, because I do them quite frequently, so it's like, it's definitely a very primal feeling of I am not a man. I am not Mike Brancatelli. I'm not a man. I'm not anything. I am this kind of primal oneness that I feel. I'm a human being, or I'm at least having a human experience.
Yeah, so that sounds more like my experience with MDMA,
Mm-hmm.
which I did in college, and which I think should be required in the schools.
Yeah.
Mandated for all children.
It's fun. It's very fun.
Annually. I don't know. I mean, do you consider that a psychedelic?
Yeah, they categorize it as one. I don't necessarily consider it as one. I think maybe it's an entheogen. I'm not really quite sure, but it makes you really super happy, releases a ton of serotonin, and it's amazing to have sex on. So,
Yeah. It's funny. I didn't actually think it was that sexual. I thought it was very sensual. I didn't want to have sex. But I was really into people's bodies in a different way, touching people's bodies, but I wasn't sexual, which was novel for me.
Yeah.
And I like that. I felt great, and I felt connected to people in sort of just a very primal physical and emotional way. And I learned from that. So I agree with, or my experience with MDMA sounds like how you describe your experience with psychedelics, I guess. The way I learned from it, the way it improved my life was I could see simply a different way to live.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I don't think it's the truth. I don't think it's truer than any other way of living. It's just an alternative that I wasn't aware of. We can live differently.
Would you call it? Yeah. Would you call it your version of the truth, or
no? Truth is just.
You don't want to get it messed up with truth.
Very bad. Yeah, just a very bad road to go. You just don't need to do that at all. There's no need for that whatsoever to make a truth claim. And again, it just does nothing but bad things if you do. I think same. It's a moral claim also. If you're just talking about your own truth, people talk about my truth. Fine, but that's not the actual meaning of truth. Truth is an absolute universal claim, meaning that what you found inside yourself, Mike, when you did psychedelics, applies to other people. You're basically making a claim for other people. Now, if you're not making a claim for other people, that you're just saying it's just in me, fine. Then I got no beef with it. It's just that's not actually the word truth means.
That's definitely what I try and do on this show. I'm not an academic. I'm a comedian, and I'm just like, just a guy who's interested in psychedelics, and I'm curious about a lot of things. So a lot of times I share my experience as in the context of, this is my experience. If you can relate to it, cool. If not, this is my experience. There's no absolute truth or not anything like that. Yeah.
That's my politics right there. What you just said. Yeah. And also I would say that, I'm sure you would agree with this. Your experience on a drug is going to be different than all other people's experience on the same drug. Now, there might be some similarities, but what happens in you during when you're on the drug is going to be a unique experience, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But I would say that there is, I would say that there is one common thread, and that common thread is that feeling of connectedness to everyone and everything, and that feeling of unity, of being kind of the same sort of life force as everybody else. There's this kind of, most people that take psychedelics do report that, and I think that's why they tend to have an increase in creativity and openness and love and empathy as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, fine.
Reluctantly agree. Okay, I'll take it.
that feeling of connectedness, also I'm sure is interpreted in infinite ways, right? That your connectedness is going to be a little bit different than the other person's connectedness.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Anyway, we don't need to belabor this, but So I was just going to say, I completely see this, though, that you can find simply a different way of living that might be better for you by doing these drugs.
Sure.
A different way of relating to people, a different way of being inside of your own body, a different way of relating to yourself and your own body, a different way of expressing yourself, a different way of dressing, a different way of talking, a different way of, different values. You might think during a trip that you don't think working at the Wall Street hedge fund is any longer good for you, or you might think that being a teacher in a public school in Harlem is no longer doing God's work and you'd rather be a sandal maker in Honduras or something, right? That happens all the time too. And so I completely see that as being really valuable. And yeah, great. And so, but for me, it was just this, the most important thing was actually the emotional alternatives that were presented to me when I was on MA. I thought, oh, wow, I can actually walk through this life without being angry or scared or anxious about the future. It is possible to do that, to live in the moment, as we say, which is actually, I think, a very valuable thing.
Yes.
I didn't know it. I didn't know it until I was doing that drug. I didn't know that that was a possibility. So
yeah, that's amazing.
I love that. Yeah, I love that part of psychedelics. Absolutely.
That's the answer that Anthony Bourdain gave.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he said that basically he's like, look, like, I don't know about some universal truth or something like that, but I know that it changed my perspective. And it can change your perspective. And you just brought up an interesting thing. I mean, it's like, essentially, would you say that you were presented with the ability to know that you actually have a choice about how you want to live? Like, you actually have choices?
Yeah. Doing that drug was the first time I realized I had a choice of feeling differently, that I could actually choose to feel differently.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I forgot about it. Until about 5 years ago. So that's about 30 years there, in which during the 30 years, it never even occurred to me that I could feel differently than I was. So I had tremendous anxiety. I had panic attacks. I had terrible insomnia. That was my thing. And I would just suffer through it. And I would just wait for it to be over with. I would just wait and wait and wait and just assume that I had to just get through it. And I would always think, oh, well, once I finish my school or I get a job or I finish the book or whatever it was, then I'll no longer be anxious. But it was always, I never thought that in that moment when I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling at 4 a.m, not able to sleep, thinking that the world was going to cave in the next day and that I was a terrible person and that my life was going to be over soon. It never even occurred to me that I could change the way I felt in that moment. That feeling seemed to me to be inevitable and necessary and something I just had to endure. And then 5 years ago, I started doing therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And that was the first thing they told me was, you don't have to, there are things you can do that are pretty simple to just not feel that way. In those moments, you can feel differently in those moments. That in itself was revelatory. And then they just started giving me really simple cognitive tools that I could teach you in like 5 minutes, that if you apply them and actually use them and work them, they can do that. You will no longer feel that way. You can change the way you feel in the moment. But I'm sure that a lot of drugs will give you that same possibility, that same alternative. So yeah, I endorse it.
Yeah, I think that, that's amazing. And I've heard you talk about, obviously, I think your Rogan appearance there was a section in there that got kind of, a lot of people talking. And I think you alluded to the fact, or you're not alluded, but basically asserted that, look, you can make a choice. Like, this is you can choose your identity. And I think, yeah. And I think that this comes from, I think, a difference in visions. I know Thomas Sowell wrote a book, Conflict of Visions. And, he says that, people on the left have a tendency to have these visions of the unconstrained man, that the possibilities are endless, that we're malleable, infinitely malleable, that we can choose who we want to be in this world and we can make it so. And then the constrained vision, which would be, I guess, the more conservative vision, is that, no, man is flawed. We're not this moldable clay. We have to, impose limits to ourselves because we're dangerous and, life is cruel, brutish, and short, and we're all going to die if we don't adhere to these constrained visions.
Wow. So Sowell, I don't know about this. Sowell associates the unconstrained man with the left?
Yes.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's completely opposite, right? I mean, to me, well, I would say certainly many conservatives, many people on the right are all about constraints too, but Jesus Christ, certainly these days, I mean, who's trying to constrain whose freedom? I mean, it's people on the left, but it doesn't, I don't really need to go down that road too far again, but, what was I going to say? Yes, about identity. Yeah, that's true. I wasn't thinking about identity. I was just thinking about just, your mental health generally. But sure, this applies to identity as well. Yes, you can fucking be whatever you want to be. And how do I know that? Well, look at history.
Right.
Look at history. Look at the way people identify now. Go walk down the street in New York City right now and look at the first 100 people you look at, and then look at the same street 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 years ago. They look completely different. They're dressed differently. Some of them look kind of like men. Some kind of look like women, but kind of not. Some of them are in between. I mean, whereas 50 years ago, the gender binary was really, really firm. And it was very hard to see anyone who didn't look like every other man. This is gay history, right? Gay history 101 shows you this. And you just look at pictures. You can look at like the faggiest men in the world in the 1950s looked like the president of the United States because they had to.
Because they were repressed, yeah.
Yeah, they had to. I mean, to literally save their own lives, their own careers, their own mental health. I mean, and often they were married and often they had children. My uncle was one of them, by the way. I mean, he was the gayest person you will ever meet in your life. But he was married for 30 years and had 3 children and didn't come out until he was 45. And if you looked at him, I mean, he looked like everyone else. Now he talked with a lisp and everyone knew he was gay because of that.
Right.
But in the earlier generation, they would restrain their lisps. It was a big thing. And the gay organizations in the 50s had rules not allowing men with lisps into their organizations because it would discredit homosexuality. So they all sounded all the same. And my point being is that identities of all kinds have shifted all over the place in all sorts of ways just over the last 10 or 20 years, and certainly historically radically shifted. So the people have proven that you can choose your identity.
Sure, of course, yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And it's constantly shifting, ever changing. I mean, where are we going to be in 20 years from now when we have half cyborg people walking down the street saying, "I identify as a robot. I identify as a cyborg." No, you're not. You're a human being. Well, it's like
these people, the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, these guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're infuriating, and this is one of the ways in which they're infuriating. They pretend to be they are actually liberals in a sense, but their whole thing is, it's just biologically a fact that there are men and women, and that's what it is, and that's what got me into trouble on Rogan when he asked me if I was born a man, and I said no.
Right, and Thad, that's exactly why I asked you that now, because I related it to my experience with psychedelics and that that primal feeling of that I am not identifying as a man, that I am identifying as something else beyond that. So that's why I brought that up, because I feel that there's a connection there, and I understand what you're saying. I understood what you were coming from, and where you're coming from. And I think a lot of people misunderstood that.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people did understand it though, and a lot of people. The nice thing about that, of course, I got a million cavemen yelling at me about being a pussy, faggot, cuck, idiot, moron for months. I still get some tweet almost every day about that. But I also got hundreds and hundreds of people who either said, "Wow, I never thought about it that way," or, and these are my favorites, I got lots of people saying, "Damn, I thought you were an idiot when you started talking, and I still am not at all sure that I agree with you, but you have me thinking about this. I've never thought about this before." And that's what I love, is when I get people thinking. And I love it when people don't agree with me, but are thinking about what I've been saying. The gender thing, the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris fuckers, and what they're saying is, essentially what it boils down to is that any deviation from gender norms is unnatural. So that the men in the 1950s, like my uncle, who were 100% homosexual and 100% interested in my uncle's case, collecting antiques and going to bathhouses and having sex with 20-year-old Filipinos that they were doing the natural thing by repressing all of those desires, by dressing in business suits, by being married, by having children, by acting like heterosexuals. Because, hey, that, acting the way my uncle wanted to act was not like a man. That's not what men do.
And is
He was
that
acting like a woman.
because? And do you think that that's because they see that as a threat or a condemnation to their lifestyle choices?
I don't know, but it's pretty much the fucking most totalitarian,
right,
meanest thing. It's just fucking mean. Like, I get, sure, that the trans politics stuff now often goes off the rails and becomes sort of totalitarian in its own way, and I've got my own problems with it now. But this idea that your parts, your dick, is your destiny is just. I mean,
that might have to be the title of this episode.
It's totalitarian, and these guys pretend to be upset about the totalitarians on campuses. No, this is a totalitarian reaction to a totalitarianism, because look what happened in the 50s, right? When people did deviate from the gender norms, they did lose their careers, they lost their jobs, they often were killed, they were put in prison, they were castrated. They were literally rounded up. You would go to a bar in Greenwich Village, you'd go to the Stonewall Inn in the 1950s or 60s, and every week the fucking cops would pull up and they would pull everyone into a paddy wagon and take them downtown for booking and then report their names to the newspaper. So it's like, that's the logical culmination of this idea that I was born a man, right? Yeah. I was born a man is the claim that there is a biologically determined destiny for me, that there are things that men, this is what Rogan said, he listed them, he started listing them, and one of the things he listed was men have sex with women. And I said to him, you may remember this, have you ever heard of the gays?
Right.
Right? And he said, oh, well, of course, but that's an anomaly. I said, well, yeah, it's a very important anomaly, isn't it, though? Are they men? And are they unnatural? It really is the question. Are gays unnatural? Well, they are, because they have a dick. Well, the dick doesn't go into an anus, it goes into a vagina, dummy. So therefore, they are unnatural. Well, once they're unnatural, then what do we do with these people? How do we treat them? How do we think about them? What do we allow them to do? What do we not allow them to do?
Right, we dehumanize them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is just a complete assault on freedom. And it could be legal, it could be cultural. If it's just cultural, what you're doing is you're shaming people. Because when you say that you're unnatural for doing this, that, or the other thing, you're saying that they're doing something that's wrong, that's bad. If it's unnatural, it's a bad thing, isn't it? It pisses me off because for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that I have always been, to some extent, trans, right? I mean, we all are in a way, but I've always been very aware of it. I'm very masculine in some ways, sort of classically masculine in a lot of ways, but in some important ways, I'm quite feminine. And I think that's why I've always been very attracted to gay men, and very attracted culturally, attracted to that culture, that they can talk about. Here's one thing.
I respect them, yeah.
Well, here's what they do that we're not supposed to do as straight men. They talk about their feelings. Women talk about their feelings. We don't. We can't. We're not supposed to. And that's my podcast. That's what makes my podcast different, is that I talk to people about their feelings, and I talk about my own feelings. I talk about my own feelings in ways that blow people away. If I were a woman or a gay man, it probably wouldn't be as shocking. But because I come off as so straight and so male and so masculine, I think it really, it blows people away that I'm saying things that are so intimate about myself.
Yeah.
And my own feelings, and showing my feelings, and losing control of my feelings in some cases. And not just anger, I lose control of sadness on the show, which you don't do. You're not supposed to do as a man. You can lose control of your anger, that's okay. But you can't lose control of your sadness or your pain or your feelings of guilt or shame or all that stuff. So that I am doing that's contrary to gender norms. I am being trans in that moment when I do that. And if you claim that I was born a man, well, I shouldn't be doing that.
Right. Yeah. No, according to what we identify, what we say is that. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really powerful thing to do, and I do that on this show as well. I mean, I definitely talk about my feelings, and I think that is by opening up and by communicating in that way. I think you're doing a lot of good, because what you're doing is you're letting other people know that it's okay to also have those feelings, to think that way. You know, there's so much of, I think what you were talking back in the 50s is like that repression. It's like these people, they're walking around, there must have been so much fear and anxiety and just psychological trauma inside of them to say, I can't open up about this stuff. And once you open up and you start talking and you're vulnerable, it gives permission for other people to do that, and that's a courageous and bold act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at pictures of people in the 50s and even early 60s. Everyone literally looks the same. It's almost like the Soviet Union, just with sort of a higher level of income. But I mean, there were 3 colors of business suit, and that's what everyone wore all day long, even working class people for the most part on the streets. I mean, you know, they wore the same hats. They wore, you know, black or navy blue business suits, and the women had like 4 or 5 different kinds of dresses to choose from. And that was it. I mean, women couldn't wear pants in the 1950s. You know, I mean, it was really regimented, and especially along the gender binary. I mean, there was very firm rules about what a man could do, what he could say, how he could say it, what he could wear, how he could act, and for women too. So anyway, it's like, this claim that this stuff is biologically determined just is completely discredited by history. And more importantly, fuck you, man. You know, really, fuck you. And I get to do what I want to do. What you're telling me is I shouldn't do what I want to do. That's really what that claim is, right? That's what it is. You should not do what you want to do. If I want to wear a dress, that's what they're saying. They're saying I shouldn't want to do that. I shouldn't do that. I mean, fuck you.
Sure, yeah, you should be allowed to do that, but you know, and then the other side of that is that other people they don't have to be forced to be happy for you. They don't have to be forced to agree with you. But as long as there's no, you know, laws that are, you know, really like aggressive attitudes and actions, I mean, yeah, you should be allowed to exist in the world as you are. It's reminds me of, I think I forget who said it, but it's like, yeah, you know, there's people out there that are happy, like, yeah, it just makes me upset. Like they're happy.
Yeah, I mean, now I will say, I mean, that the Jordan Petersons and Dave Rubins of the world are completely correct that a lot of people in the trans movement are their own form of totalitarian. I mean, they, as you were saying, they sort of insist that we say certain things and that we treat them in particular ways and it's not treat them, think about them in particular ways. So they want to police our thoughts as well. And the worst thing that they're doing, and this really makes me crazy because it's completely counter to the beginning of their movement, the origin of their movement, it's what made them possible. They're saying often, not always, but often say that I was born a man or I was born a woman. They're actually making a biologically deterministic argument about themselves, right? That's Caitlyn Jenner's whole thing. I was born a woman, and a woman looks like this. So they're saying, they're just flipping it over, but it's still a biological determinism. It's just of a different sort, but that's also totalitarian, because what you're saying is, you know, again, your parts are your destiny. The parts just aren't inside, apparently. these people, you know, they can't see them on the outside, I guess. I don't know, but it's meaning that it's of their nature, it's in their body, who they are, and they have no choice. They have no choice. That's Caitlyn Jenner's argument. She has said that. I had no choice. I was born a woman. So it's just the flip side of what Rogan said.
Yeah.
Ironically, they agree on. Yeah.
But they get totalitarian, I think, as reactions to the extremes, and then they pop out. They wind up becoming in the same characteristics of the people that they oppose. So it kind of fails. And to me, I always scratch my head and wonder. You know, I admire kind of like the maybe the birth of the revolution of the anti-war movement in the 60s and the civil rights and that sort of stuff. And I feel as if that we have kind of lost that mentality of live and let live sort of attitude. And I often wonder a lot of times, where did that go? How come everybody seems that they want to be controlling the levers of power. They want to be totalitarians. They, as long as it's their side, as long as they're morally superior, their side. You know, where how do you think that came to be the case now that everybody seems to be aggressively wanting to seize control because they know it's best?
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting movie, a documentary that everyone should watch. I've mentioned this, I think, on my show. It's called Berkeley in the 60s. It's about my hometown in the decade when I was born.
Oh, yeah, you were right there.
And,
yeah.
And my mother is actually, she has a brief cameo in the film. You can see her at a sit-in protest at Woolworths, I think, protesting segregation at a department store in Oakland in the 60s. But the most important thing about that movie that really opened my eyes, because my parents were very much leftists in the 1960s and 70s in Berkeley, and they were the political left. They were the ones, they were socialists.
Right.
They wanted to take control of industry. You know, they industrialized, they took jobs as factory workers to organize the proletariat for revolution. And, you know, they were very, they didn't really live up to it entirely, but their ideology was all about discipline, because, you know, workers must be disciplined to have a revolution, to run society, and to have socialism, etc. And so that was the world I grew up in, and that was the only left wing I knew, or that was the only part of that culture in the Bay Area then that I knew. I mean, I was aware of the hippies, and certainly they were around, and I had, you know, in Berkeley there was all sorts, but the people I knew intimately were the hardcore politicos, and they hated the hippies in San Francisco, in Golden Gate Park, who were smoking weed and just lying in the grass and having sex and running around naked and just living in the moment for pleasure, you know, seemingly. Now the hippies had their own weird ideologies here and there, but a lot of the hippie movement, a lot of people who called themselves hippies were really just into, you know, rock and roll. Like, they were really just into getting high.
Yeah, following the Grateful Dead around, taking acid.
Yeah. That was most of it. And that's exactly why my parents and their comrades hated them so much. Because they were seen as not serious, not serious about politics, not serious about revolution, not serious about responsibility, taking control, managing society, running society, all those things. The movie Berkeley in the 60s shows that split really well. And it shows that there's very much two different countercultures in the 1960s that were actually not just different, but hostile to one another. The hippies didn't care about the new left in Berkeley, but the new left really hated the hippies because they weren't serious. So there was that moment, as you were saying, when people were just, you know, and by the way, look how the hippies wore their hair. The men, they were the ones who did this. I mean, they were the ones. If you look at the men in the 50s and the men in the 60s, the hair is about 4 times longer. And, you know, by the end of the 60s and early 70s, like even the president, like Jimmy Carter had long hair in the 1970s. I mean, compared to the 1950s. And that's what women do. So they were bending genders. They were the first ones to really do that and to do it successfully. More than gays, by the way. Hippies were much more responsible for that, for showing men a different way to look that was previously thought of as feminine, that became completely respectable. So the hippies of that sort really are a model. There's a great T-shirt I've seen around. You may have seen it. It just says, "The hippies were right." And at least those hippies were right. There were hippies who also were about going back to the land and having these communes, you know, farming communes in the wilderness in Oregon and California, and they basically just worked all the time because that's what farmers do, you dipshits. And you know, and so they were like, we got to fell trees, and then we got to plant the corn, and then we got to make our clothes, and it sucked. And they became like these Puritan pilgrims or something. But the hippies in San Francisco were mostly libertines.
Right.
They were mostly about displeasure and about just not just questioning these boundaries and these rules about how to live, but just violating them, just doing things differently. So they wore their hair longer, and the next thing you know, everyone else was wearing their hair longer, and they wore bell-bottom jeans, and everyone else, and they wore jeans. That was another thing. The hippies were primarily responsible for that. No one wore jeans except if you were working in a logging camp. before the 1960s, or a coal mine. They were completely work apparel. After the 60s, the hippies started wearing jeans, and everyone started wearing jeans, and that sort of also loosened this public-private split. So now we can wear jeans in public. We can even wear jeans as we're being public figures. It just loosened all the restrictions around being a public person and what it meant to be an American. So, I actually gave them short shrift in my book. I should have done more on them.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was in like last chapter or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just talked about the commune hippies and how they kind of destroy, or I don't know, they contradicted their own ideas about freedom. But I should have talked much more about these hippies that I'm talking about now. The ones who lived for really themselves, their own pleasures, and who just violated these rules of polite society. So
yeah, what this country was founded on.
Oh, well, not to mention they also founded the psychedelic culture.
Yeah, yeah.
that you are benefiting from now. I mean, they are your ancestors, man.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that they've done a lot of things, and I think they've managed to kind of like also integrate into the capitalist culture and produce things like, I mean, Steve Jobs talks about dropping acid, and it was the greatest thing that he's ever done. And then, boom, you have the invention of the Mac and all these wonderful gadgets and things that we have today. So, but then again, then you'll have people say, well, he turned evil. He became evil. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he was evil. I mean, I don't know. I think it's just the nature of the world that we live in. Things are very complex. If there's anything that we can gather from this podcast, and I know we're a little over. Do you have a little bit more time, or do you got to go?
Yeah.
You do?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, so it's like, we want to put these, we want to really, like you said before, we want to have the villains so we can be the heroes, and smash these people. But it's more complex than that, right? I mean, we live in a really crazily complex world that we can't even begin to fathom. The events have influenced other events, and good, bad, it all happens. And who's to say, I'll give you an example. Like, oftentimes people will say things like, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself too. Like, if it wasn't for the state, if we just abolished the state, then everything would be good. Then we would have a much better world, and we can have a better chance and things like that. And it's, these fucks in power, they're manipulating, they're controlling, but isn't that kind of like, isn't it us? Isn't this part of our story as humanity? I mean, isn't this kind of our dare I say, collective, path here to kind of figure all this stuff out as we move along and try and perfect the best way to kind of live and be?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, if you mean, I thought you meant that we chose the state.
Well, yeah. What I'm saying is that it's like, oftentimes I get an argument. I get the state is almost like an inevitable from humanity. Like I tend to think that if people were educated a little bit more, like I tend to think that if people were a little bit educated as to knowing what this power structure that we call the state actually is, then we can kind of start to abolish it, that we could start to live without it. But yeah, like I think that it's our perception of this perceived magical, mystical thing that we call authority, this kind of thing that we give power to, that we give rights to, that no individual, we believe, should possess, but it's okay for the state to possess. But it's I'm trying to articulate this in a proper way, but it's like that almost is an inevitable from being a human being. Like, I don't know if is there something that we can do to prevent that? Is there some kind of way? I mean, what do we do? Dose all of the popular? I know Timothy Leary wanted to do that. He wanted to wake everybody up and tune in, turn on, drop out, everybody take acid. I mean, I think yeah, sure, but what are the chances that's going to happen?
Yeah, so it's funny. You know who said something similar to you about the state being an inevitable part of the historical process, and that it would eventually wither away?
Oh boy,
you know who said that?
Who?
Karl Marx.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? He said that it was stages of the next stage was capitalism, and then after that, it would eventually erode. Right?
Wither away was the phrase.
Wither away.
the workers would take control. The state would be built by the bourgeois, the capitalist class, and then the workers would have a revolution and take over the state. But then once they took over the state, they would realize that I don't know if they would realize, but they would just sort of begin to, I don't know, this is when it becomes mystical. They would begin to, for whatever reasons, slowly dismantle the state because it's not necessary for human flourishing. And so it would ultimately wither away and cease to exist. And then we would live in a pure communism. And he didn't really elaborate on this, but it's at the end of the Communist Manifesto, and it's sort of mentioned elsewhere in his work. But we would live in pure communism where everyone is taken care of and everyone works for the greater good, but they work less than they did under capitalism, and there is peace and tranquility and plenty. So yeah. So
well, yeah. Well, come on. Well, hold on a second. No, I'm not going to let you get away with saying that I'm a Marxist because I think that because I don't believe in that utopian vision. I don't think that. My ultimate vision would be this. And if there's anything that I communicate and advocate for this show, it's that for everybody has the right to liberty. Everybody should have the right to direct experience, and everybody should be able to have that without having anyone else infringe on them, and that kind of I would call it morality. I would call that a kind of decency or respect for the individual, respect and honoring of the individual and the individual's rights. And I would think that that if we could somehow get or maybe encourage people to take psychedelic drugs and realize that they have a choice, that they don't have to live, that this thing that we call authority is not actually real, that we can actually choose to live our lives ourselves and we can live in freedom, then the ultimate goal of that would be to secede, for us to go our separate ways and live in peace and not in total peace, but to go our separate ways and to live and let live.
Yeah, I like that. So this is why you should not use words like inevitable. This idea you have about the state being inevitable.
Yeah. Well, I didn't say that it was. I said that some people think that it's inevitable. That it's an inevitable.
I thought you were saying that it was. I forgot the words you used, but
I said
it sounded like a determinism, right? That it's
no.
just a part of,
no. So I was thinking.
History of human beings.
Right. Yeah. No. Right. So I guess maybe clarify that. Well, what I was saying was that I said that I think some people would argue that it's an inevitable outcome for the history of human beings, and I have a hard time because I would say no, but then I have a hard time understanding because we're here now, we have the state and we have belief in the state, we have belief in authority.
So here's the thing. So you're not a Marxist, you're a Leninist.
Oh shit.
So this was the big split in Marxism. It's actually interesting and it's instructive, and you are completely reminding me of this now. So Marx said, right, it's all sort of planned out in advance. Like he was a complete determinist, right? There were these inevitable phases of history that we would go through. There'd be there was agrarian primitivism, bourgeois accumulation when all the factories were built, and then there was a socialist revolution when the workers took over, and then the withering away of the state, and then pure communism at the end of it, right? And he sort of said, this is just going to happen no matter what people do. And even though he was about organizing parties and unions and all these things and being an activist, he basically was saying, at least this is the way most people read him, that this stuff would just play out sort of no matter what we chose to do. Then Lenin comes along and fortunately he's a Marxist and he lives in this backward ass primitive peasant country called Russia, which hadn't gone through the first two stages yet. But he wanted a revolution right now. So he was like, fuck it. I'm just going to say that we can have a revolution right now, regardless of what Marx said, that nothing is determined. Our status, our economic place in the world is not our destiny. We can make socialism happen and even pure communism happen right now. And so that strain of thought in Marxism was called voluntarism, because they argued that we can voluntarily change history. We don't have to wait for history to change for us, which is what Marx's ideas were pretty much. So guess what they did? They kind of made a bad move there in the particular choice of changing history. They had a revolution in Russia, which did no one any good. But there was something kind of nice about that, at least. I hate determinism of all kinds because again, it just tells you can't. You can't change anything. And I know you're not saying this. You are a voluntarist in that sense, not a Marxist.
Yeah, I'm a voluntarist, Rothbardian anarchist.
Yeah, we can change right now, and we can make radical changes right now, and I believe that, no doubt about it. Yeah. So, yeah, everyone should do more drugs. Oh, that's obvious. I mean, do I even have to say that? I mean, look, just weed. If imagine if all the people in America who drink alcohol changed to weed today.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Can you? Oh my! I mean, the reduction in violence.
Mm-hmm.
We would sleep better, and therefore be better. I mean, because Americans don't sleep enough because they work so much. They would have a much better balance, I think, between work and leisure in their lives. Their sex would be better. They would be less angry. They would be less depressed. Oh man, it would be
amazing. Yeah.
Just weed.
Right.
Just
totally.
Weed.
So
Yeah.
as we're wrapping up the convo towards the end here, let's end it on something big then and grand. So what is driving all of this? Why can't we do that? Why can't we, have this happen? There's all the science is out there, the information's out there, the internet has decentralized information. Is it, dare I say again, inevitable that this might happen? Or but where is this coming from? Where is this preventing? Why are we being prevented from starting this kind of quote unquote revolution? And
what do you mean?
Why
it is happening? It is happening.
There you go. Okay, so fine. So it is happening, although it's happening at more at kind of it's not really happening at a mainstream level. It's happening at an underground level, and then that's the argument of your book, Renegade's Guide to, right? Like for the people on the fringes.
What do you mean it's not happening at a mainstream level? What have the states done in the last 3 years? The states of the United States, they've legalized marijuana.
Yes, I mean, a few of them.
No, I think it's most now.
Okay, well, let me rephrase a little bit. I guess
at least it's many. I know that. Look, you cannot walk down the street in LA without smelling.
Sure.
Weed. I mean, it's Oregon. It's recreational weed is legal in Oregon and California, and I think in Massachusetts,
and Colorado.
States. Colorado, Washington, big states, big populations.
That's like 5 states.
Well, but those are huge population centers. So if you look at the population, and it's other states too, but if you look at the population that is now living with legal marijuana, it's a massive portion of the American population as a whole. Clearly, it's being mainstreamed. There's no doubt about that. I mean, this is, it's no doubt. I mean, it's people are think about marijuana completely differently now at all levels of our society. So
that's true.
Jeff Sessions.
You're right. Yeah.
Jeff Sessions, when he started talking about going after the states,
primitive savage.
I laughed. I wasn't angry at all. I was like, "Good luck, fool! Like you will have no chance at all. Like he is such a dinosaur, even within his own party, even among Republicans, even among Christian conservatives. I think most of them now are for legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, The shit that he says about marijuana is equivalent to being like a flat earther. It's absurd.
I want him to do that because all it does is it just hastens our ultimate victory. Because all he's doing is setting himself up for this massive defeat. I mean, please do try to crack down on Los Angeles dispensaries. Good Jeff Sessions cracking down on California weed dispensaries now, and who do you think is going to win that? I mean, it's going to be such a crushing defeat for him. And for that whole idea, that'll be like the final straw, and we'll break through, and then legalization will be everywhere. He's just going to bring on the complete legalization and mainstreaming of weed faster. So God bless you, Jeff. But my point here is that he is seen by most people as a complete dinosaur.
Yes. Okay. So great. So then, you answered my question. Then, so basically, what you're saying is that these archaic dinosaurs with their backwards regressive ideologies, they're the ones that are actually going to bring it on faster and expedite the process from living in this kind of weird untruth reality that they still live in.
Because they create this glaring contradiction. Right?
Yeah.
They make this complete what they say so clearly contradicts the actual experiences of most people that's usually what causes laws to be changed. Is when people they see that there's what the politician is saying bears no resemblance to my experience then you'll see laws change. And that's exactly what happened with weed. People were not dying from weed. People were not becoming addicted. People were not losing their jobs. People were not, breaking up their marriages. People were not suffering in all these ways. They weren't becoming heroin addicts a month later after smoking their first joint. They were actually happier. They were sleeping better. They were, so it just made no sense. The anti-weed people, so this is only by the way, a 50-year or 60-year process. I mean, weed laws, marijuana laws weren't really enforced until about the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
1930s.
Yeah, Harry Anslinger.
60s, 60, 70 years. I mean, this is a little blip in history. So we went through that so quickly, which, by the way, coincides almost exactly with the Soviet Union, the life of the Soviet Union, by the way. That tells you that we're moving really fast, actually.
So is that the lifespan? That's the lifespan of bad ideas?
About 70 years, yeah, looks like it. So that's fast, though, right? We go from complete prohibition, and there are movies everywhere telling us that weed will kill us and make us psychotic, to Massachusetts and California legalizing the recreational use of marijuana, right? I mean, that's a fast revolution and a really good one. So it is happening.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. You
got to extend it to the other drugs. That's the problem.
Yeah,
so
definitely. We'll get basically
has,
it's just time. It's time is what it is.
Yeah.
So then you're an optimist, right?
Oh, completely. On this? Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm generally speaking. Do you consider yourself to be an optimist?
Just again, got to look at history. So the last, it's mixed. No, I'm not entirely an optimist. So if you look at the last 100, 200 years, you see phenomenal things like, just the wealth of ordinary people has just skyrocketed. People in sub-Saharan Africa are living way, way, way better than they were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And people everywhere are living way, way, way better than they were 100 years ago. Materially, the poor in the world, the poorest people in the world are rich compared to the poor 50 years ago. And of course, the middle class and the wealthy, contrary to what a lot of people are saying, everybody's living far better. We have access to all this information, all the information in the world, to the internet. We have a voice. We can speak. We can have podcasts. We can have blogs. We have our own media, which is now becoming bigger than the traditional mainstream media. It's an entirely new world that is overwhelmingly far better now, and that's all happened in the last 50 to 100 years. But if you look at the last 100 to 200 years, you also see the biggest, most murderous wars in human history.
Right.
You see about, just in World War I and World War II, just those two wars. Those wars, people don't know this, those wars killed about 2% of the entire Earth's population. 2% of everybody on Earth during those wars died because of those wars. I mean, that's not good at all. And we, of course, have that capability to do that and even worse right now. And I see no reason to not be always very, very nervous about the next world war jumping off. That is kind of that's my major cause. That's my primary passion, is stopping that from happening, because it's underappreciated just what that means. Mm-hmm. And it can absolutely happen really at any time, no matter who's president.
Yeah, I kind of had this hope that Trump being president would wake up the left, and we would get together and hold hands and chant anti-war.
They don't care. They don't care.
Nobody. It seems like nobody cares, really.
Nobody cares. Yeah, no, I know, it's really, really depressing. This is the worst thing about Americans, I think.
Yes, I agree.
They're partly not to blame. It's because we have these big oceans on either side of us,
right? And
we have Canada on the top of us and Mexico on the bottom of us. So no one has really constituted a real threat to us ever, and we've never been invaded. We've never felt that. We've never been invaded or colonized since the revolution.
Wait, didn't the Russians invade us in the 80s? Oh wait, no, that was Red Dawn. Never mind.
Yeah,
I've
never seen that.
Red Dawn. Yeah, it was like
I know what it is.
Yeah.
So, and then the oceans also, and then our material wealth, our relative material wealth, made it so that our physical isolation and our material wealth made it so that we didn't need to study the rest of the world. We didn't need to know about the rest of the world. We didn't need to worry about the rest of the world or what they might do to us. for the most part, except for the Russians with their missiles. That was the only thing that got the attention of Americans was the Russian missiles. And every once in a while, when someone would make up some lie about someone having weapons of mass destruction, or maybe some communists in some little third world country might attack us, but Americans didn't really believe those things, I don't think, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, but the problem is that's made us fucking ignorant.
Definitely.
About the rest. I mean, really, really ignorant. Like, it's so depressing. Americans can't identify. Most Americans, I think, can't identify Washington D.C. on a map. I mean, not even like the region. They don't even get close when they pinpoint where Washington D.C. is on a blank map of the United States.
Does that anger you?
It's just depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of past anger on that. I'm just sort of, I've lost. I don't know. I'm just despair. I despair about it. I mean, it's when they call for bombing countries they had not heard of the day before. That pisses me off.
Right.
You know, Americans have never heard of Syria.
Oh God.
They certainly couldn't identify it. Which is, by the way, this is a great argument against democracy. This is the best argument against democracy. You really want to give those people the power to go to war? I don't want the president to have the power either, but democracy. Well, first of all, the president is democratically elected. You know, we did choose him or her. But giving the power directly to the people over foreign policy is terrifying, because they're idiots. Generally, and it's deeply. I mean, we're talking deep ignorance, just geography. I mean, the way that Americans score on geography tests and surveys, it's shocking. I mean, they can't even. A lot of Americans can't identify Europe on a map. They couldn't even show you where. I mean, like a big percentage of Americans can't do that.
That's really sad. So, yeah.
Right. So they shouldn't be anywhere near a gun or a tank or an airplane, or I mean, they should have no power whatsoever, right? Think about that, you know. And they're also easily manipulated, and they're also very moralistic. They see the world through this binary bad evil lens, bad or evil good lens. And so when they're told that someone's evil, they want to kill them, blow them up, and they don't think twice about it because they don't see the results of it because they live across the globe from
right. And then when I rant and rave about things like, well, Assad's the only secular dictator in the region, and we've been supporting the rebels on the ground, and so blah 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 blah. People are just like, what the hell are you talking about, man? He's evil. He's a brown person. We got to kill him.
Yeah. I know. So we don't want the people having power over foreign policy either. It's,
definitely not.
I just don't want I don't want anyone. I don't want there to be foreign policy. That's what I want. I want the elimination of foreign policy.
Yes.
I don't want the state doing anything in foreign policy at all. So
agreed. Bring the troops home, close up the bases, get rid of it.
So am I optimistic? Yeah, I'm optimistic that we're going to have some amazing, astonishing inventions that will change our lives. We're going to have driverless cars, man, probably in my lifetime. That's just, that alone is just awesome.
Yeah.
And you know, who knows what else? And I think drugs are going to be legalized. I think most drugs will be legalized in my lifetime. And I think we're all going to, I really mean like all of us will live better materially. Even the poor will live materially, you know, forever, basically. I see no end to that unless we go to war, unless there's some major war. And that could happen at any time. So I'm optimistic and pessimistic. Not pessimistic, but I'm very, very worried, and I'm not necessarily optimistic about peace in the world. Yeah.
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, and I think that one of the things that you're doing is, you got to, like, in addition to the books that you write and the essays that you write and the Renegade University now that you're starting. I mean, you're really starting an education revolution. The podcast that you do is absolutely phenomenal. Unregistered with Thaddeus Russell, and so I think that this is taking hold of this kind of this wonderful thing that we have, the internet, that's decentralizing information and making it available to all kinds of people all over the world. And when those ideas spread and you're provoking thought, you're doing your part to make the world a better place. So thank you, Thaddeus Russell. Thanks for being on my show. And it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, man. I could go on for hours and hours with you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike. It was a blast.
Thank you. You got it. You know what to do if you love this show. Share it, like it, spread it with your friends. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/Mike Brank. You can donate as little as $1 a month. Or you could go on iTunes and leave me a nice 5-star rating and review. Whatever